Great. Thank you, Brenda. Good morning, everyone. I will also welcome you to the Innovation Lab. We are just so excited to have these deep conversations about teacher recruitment over the next few days, and we do hope you'll join us in that work throughout the end of this year. So today, as we begin, I want to just first share a couple of norms for our collaboration together. So the first of those norms, if I can get, there we go. The first of the norms is just to be present as best you can. We know that this is just such a different environment this year, and everybody has so many things going on at home this year. So we ask that you be present as much as you can throughout the next 3 hours, and we hope you will participate. We have some opportunities for Q&A and several breakout discussion opportunities, so we hope you will participate fully and lean into those conversations. We ask that you support productive conversation and share airtime equitably as we learn from one another over the next few days. And lastly, we do ask that you have grace with us and all the technology, and we hope everything will go smoothly, but hope you'll also understand if there are any glitches in that work. I am now pleased to introduce our first presentation, which will be from Dr. Tom Tomberlin. Dr. Tomberlin is the Director of Educator Recruitment and Support at NCDPI, and he is going to share with us just a lay of the land of what we're doing and how we're doing in teacher recruitment. What does the data tell us about our pipeline and where our teachers are and where they're going, where they're being prepared, and then where they're going once they're employed in our public school system in those first couple of years of employment. Dr. Tomberlin also has a great new data tool to share with you, so we hope that you will find that interesting and take some time to dive into the tool later today or in your free time. Dr. Tomberlin has pre-recorded his presentation so we could, get the timing and all the technology down. So we will watch his presentation first, and then he will be available for live question and answer. He's with us now, and he'll be available for live question and answer after the presentation. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin.
Good morning. My name is Tom Tomberlin. I'm the Director of Educator Recruitment and Support for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I'm very happy to meet with you today virtually to discuss the teacher recruitment landscape in North Carolina. Recently, the state is focused on teacher recruitment and diversifying the teaching force. The North Carolina State Board of Education, STRIDE, and DRIVE are all working towards strengthening the teacher pipeline and increasing the diversity of North Carolina's teaching force. Data are essential for these efforts if we are to craft policy recommendations that can achieve the desired outcomes. NCDPI is also working with these efforts by developing a suite of statewide human capital dashboards. You can access these dashboards by clicking the link below. After clicking the link, you will have access to a variety of dashboards focused on different aspects of the human capital pipeline. Today we'll be talking mostly about recruitment and preparation of our teachers, but there are a variety of other elements that one could look at. So let's start out with examining the teacher pipeline. So from this graph, you see the different routes that teachers can come through to obtain North Carolina licensure. There's alternative entry, North Carolina teacher prep, which is largely through our institutions of higher education, and then out of state, where teachers were prepared in another state but came and obtained North Carolina licensure. The bars in blue represent teachers in the state with a continuing professional license. These are renewable licenses every 5 years. The bars in orange represent teachers with an initial professional license. These are non-renewable 3-year licenses that carry some kind of requirement in addition to the teaching load. Quite often these are content licensure exams or pedagogy licensure exams or even coursework. The bar in green represents the lateral entry process. Lateral entry is phasing out as of June 30th, 2022, and will be replaced by the residency program that you can see here that in the 18-19 school year had 3 candidates. So we were not looking at those in this analysis. Just to be clear, this is data from the 2018-19 school year only. So looking at these data, we see that most of our teachers currently employed with some kind of initial license have come to us through the alternative entry route, with about 7,000 coming from the traditional teacher preparation and another roughly 4,000 that are coming to us from out of state. So this represents a shift in the way teachers entered the profession as early as 2015. In this graph, we see that in 2015, many teachers came to us either from the UNC system EPPs or from out of state, with lateral entry or alternative certification being third. Now in 2019, we see that over a third of our teachers are coming to the profession through the lateral entry program, with out-of-state teachers representing about 26%, and university, this is the UNC EPPs, providing about 22% of our newly hired teachers. That, coupled with the private institutions in North Carolina, puts the total traditional prep route at about 28%. In the 2018-19 school year, we had about 5,500 first-year teachers. The predominant path for all teachers, again, was the alternative certification. But if we disaggregate this by race, we can see that for white teachers, the predominant pathway was traditional North Carolina preparation programs, with alt certification being the third most common pathway. For African American candidates, this is very different. The vast majority of these candidates are coming through our alt certification programs, with relatively small numbers coming from university prep programs or from out of state. And then finally, the Hispanic population, again, predominant pathway is alt certification, but their overall numbers in the state are extremely low. So why is this a problem, that African American teachers are entering the profession through alt certification? Well, from examining state data, we know that alternatively certified teachers are on average less effective than those teachers who are prepared through a traditional university program. Additionally, these teachers have high attrition rates relative to their traditionally prepared peers. At the end of 5 years, approximately 30% of alt certified teachers and out-of-state teachers are still teaching in the state. Compare that with greater than 50% of our traditionally prepared educators during that same 5-year period. So for African American teachers, this means that a greater majority of them will be less effective and are likely to leave the profession earlier than their white peers. Now let's look at enrollment and completion. So this graph is disaggregated by gender, but we see that roughly every year about 8,000 females and 2,000 males enroll in our EPPs across the state. When we compare that to completions by that same year, we're seeing that about 3,500 to 3,700 of those teachers are coming out of those programs in the same year. Now, we don't expect 100% completions by year, but about 50% of these teachers should be coming out of an ed prep program every year. And our numbers are low relative to that benchmark. So it does appear that there's some leaks in the pipeline where teachers are not completing the programs at rates commensurate with their enrollment. So we can disaggregate this measure again by race and gender. And as we see here, white teachers, both male and female, are completing at the average rate for the state, as are Hispanic and Latinx males and females. It is the African American population where we see a decline in those completion rates, and those completion rates are different for females as compared to males. So one point of understanding that we could come to is, why are African American females more likely not to complete a program after enrolling, or why is it taking them longer to complete the program after enrolling? And are there things that we can do to support them better so that their completion rates will be closer to what we're seeing across the state as a whole. Let's turn to enrollment, completion, and employment by license area. So as we can see from the chart, the majority of our EPP enrollees are pursuing licensure in elementary education. So in the 2018-19 school year, we had about 1,600 completers from that program. Only about 1,375 of those were issued a license. And then only about a little over 1,000 of those were actually employed in North Carolina public schools. So one area that needs investigation is what are the contributing factors to this decline or this loss of candidates from the completion stage to the licensure stage to the employment stage. The other thing we need to be aware of in this particular graph is here are the core subjects in middle school and the core subjects in high school. And for most of these, the completer rates are very low. So most of them don't even reach 100. And then there's some drop off from being issued a license and then ultimately employed. If we think about this with 115 LEAs across the state, on average, we're producing from our programs one core subject teacher per district to replace those teachers that may be leaving. Well, we know those attrition rates are higher, so this represents a great concern for us in staffing our core subjects in middle school and in high school. And then finally, support services. These are really low enrollment rates and very, very low employment rates. These are your guidance counselors and your school social workers. Remember, these data are for 2018-19. This is pre-COVID. So how does this impact our needs, the greater needs of schools for these support roles, instructional support roles, as students face the anxieties of the pandemic and the challenges of online learning? So let's turn to the dashboard and look at how teachers are placed in their first year. So this chart represents the relationship between a school's African-American student population and the percentage of first-year teachers in the faculty. So the trend line shows us that as the African-American student population rises, so does the percentage of first-year teachers in the school. So why is this problematic? Well, as with any profession, a first-year teacher is probably the least effective or on average less effective than those who have been in the profession longer. And if the higher percentages of these potentially ineffective teachers are in schools that serve higher minority populations, then African-American students would be disproportionately exposed to a first-year teacher as part of their education. So we can go out of the PowerPoint and look at this particular characteristic from another angle. And here we can look at what is that relationship with the percentage of economically disadvantaged students that the school is serving. And as you can see here, the trend is the same. As there are higher percentages of EDS students in the school, there is also a higher percentage of first-year teachers. So our most vulnerable student populations are disproportionately attending schools where there is a higher and higher percentage of first-year teachers. And the likelihood that they will experience multiple ineffective teachers over the course of their education is greatly increased. The other thing that we could look at here is how those percentages compare to school performance grades. And we see a similar trend here. As the school performance grade increases, we see fewer numbers of first-year teachers in those schools. This can be particularly challenging for first-year teachers if they're not feeling they're surrounded by a culture of academic success or in schools that are not performing well on state measures. That can be very discouraging and may lead to early exit. Another issue for these beginning teachers is if we look at the relationship between the percentage of African American students in the school and the overall growth of the teachers, the average growth of the teachers in that school, we see a negative relationship. So as the African American percentage of the school decreases, we see an increase in the average effectiveness for the teachers in that school. So if first-year teachers are entering schools that serve predominantly African American student populations, or EDS populations for that matter, the teachers in those schools themselves are less effective than the state average. And this creates a really problematic situation for our first-year teachers in that they don't have good mentors. They're not in a culture of teaching that promotes high growth. They don't have good examples to learn from. So the likelihood is these teachers will take longer to develop their effectiveness than they would have if they were in schools where instruction that promotes high growth is modeled and expected in the school. I hope these examples that we've provided illustrate the issues related to teacher preparation, licensure, and initial employment across the state. These issues are complex and interrelated. We hope that you'll use the other dashboards to help inform your understanding of other human capital issues that our teachers are facing, and use that information as you proceed through the Innovation Lab. One thing that is very clear to me from these data is that our African American teachers do not have the same opportunities for preparation, licensure, and successful employment that our white teachers do. Additionally, as our Hispanic and Latinx student populations increase, the state needs to find ways to attract more Hispanic and Latinx students to the teaching profession. And finally, although quantitative analysis can tell us where the problems are, it cannot tell us why these things are happening. There really is no substitute for thorough qualitative research to help us understand the root causes of these issues. This is the conclusion of the recorded portion of my presentation, and now I'll be available to answer any questions you might have about any of the issues I raised or the dashboards in a live session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tom, for that presentation. And we are now going to just have a few minutes for question and answer with Tom. He's also going to be available to answer questions in the chat should our time run short. So I see a question in the chat already, Tom, that I'll pose to you. Do our superintendents and LEAs have this data, particularly the data on equitable access to high quality teachers? Are these data available to district leaders such that it can be tracked over time in district level data dashboards?
Good morning.
There we go. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Bristow-Smith, for that question. At this time, LEAs do not have access to this data. They will now, because I'm sure you all will share it with folks. But we really put this stuff together for both the DRIVE initiative and Stride. And we kind of waited to kind of premiere it to those two groups before we pushed it out, and to get some QA, some quality assurances around the dashboards before we pushed it out more publicly. But yes, these are publicly available. There's no restrictions on them. They're not identifiable of any single teacher, and we hope you use them to help inform your human capital decisions.
Great. So we do encourage you to ask any questions of Tom that you might have in the chat. I'll ask a question, Tom, so we have a lot of data here. What data do we not have that we need in order to have a more full picture of our teacher recruitment landscape?
So a really important issue here would be to have really good vacancy data in our schools, and we're currently working on that in the department, developing a statewide jobs board where we can see what the what the vacancies are and how that aligns with the preparation in our programs, be it alternative or traditional preparation programs. Because if our recruitment efforts aren't focused on addressing those immediate needs, then we could have, if we have a huge influx in PE teachers, but we need science teachers, then that's really not going to help our recruitment efforts. So some alignment between the district's vacancies and the preparation programs to help push recruitment efforts.
Great. And a question from Mariah is, do we have any data reflecting teacher recruitment in relation to teacher working conditions?
So not between recruitment and working conditions, but if one of the tabs in this suite of dashboards is teacher mobility, and there we do show the mobility, the average mobility for schools at certain levels of teacher working conditions. And so you can see, you would be able to see that teacher attrition is negatively correlated with teacher working conditions. In other words, as the working conditions are lower, the attrition is higher for many teachers.
Great. So a question in the chat is about data by region, and it is available by region. If you scroll through, there's some tabs on that tool. Another question is how might you suggest that we collect the quantitative, qualitative data that you think we need? And this will be the last question.
That's a great question, and it goes back to another question that was up above. Does DPI have a protocol for the exit interviews? And I think that qualitative data are really digging in and understanding why teachers are leaving the profession, and conducting that at a state level rather than the local level might give us some better insights into what are the conditions that are causing teachers to leave the profession, and how many of those are policy relevant and how many of those are just natural things that you can't do anything about. But really understanding those differences, I think, would be really important.